So, on a farm, there's always things that happen. And so you're always building or constructing or redesigning or making things better. So I think that's where the concept of everything can be improved, there's opportunity on every corner came from. We sold vegetables at the gate, we sold eggs at the gate, we sold ham, a real shop going, the packaging, the selling, the marketing.
Yeah.
So I think I've never not been a seller of some kind or a maker of some kind. And I think actually everybody, no matter what role you have, is actually selling. I think you've got to have a passion for what the product is, and you've got to have a desire to assist the customer to understand.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Ways to Wealth. Today I am joined by Heather. Heather, why don't you give us a little summary of kind of what you're up to and what you're building and what you enjoy doing, and kind of just a high level couple of sentences about who you are and what you're about.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm so pleased to be here because you invited me, and it was a great time for us because we're about to launch a whole lot of new products, even although we were quite amazing when we launched in January this year with our Euphoria golf bag that is just like so different from golf bags have been around for 350 or more years, and ours is just so uniquely different, and that caused a stir. So it was great to be able to come and talk to you because I know some of the scope of what you do, to be able to showcase some, I think, really good New Zealand manufacturing. And how manufacturers exist in New Zealand, and what lovely design skills we have, even although we're more known for tourism and agriculture and food goods.
Yeah, we actually have a private customer. One of our private customers at the moment, he's reinventing the guitar, the electric guitar, and he's making basically is creating all the post production and all the kind of hacky whammies and everything that have been designed into guitars and stuff.
Well, certainly music's been a big part of New Zealand, hasn't it?
And he's on the path of recreating what it looks like to have an electric guitar. He's kind of thinking, how do you go to the next generation of electric guitar that has all the post-production that most people can't afford, into the actual experience of the guitar itself, which is quite cool. So it's kind of, and they're manufacturing here.
Okay. I don't think our golf bag helps you with your swing. Well, I think it does actually, because everything is so organised and so planned and so well positioned and so noiseless that I think it makes you calmer. And from my small experience of playing golf, the calmer you are, the better you are. Yeah.
I definitely would agree with that in my time playing golf too. Well, I guess it's more of a difference in mindset. When I was younger playing, I used to get very frustrated, whereas now I've accepted my poor performance, more so than anything else, maybe. But that's really cool. So, obviously, you actually have done quite a few things leading up to this point in time where you've designed something and you're building this kind of golfing brand.
Yes.
And you've mentioned that you've got some new products that you've been working on.
Yes.
But there's obviously a journey before that, a long one, kind of spanning over many industries, I noticed, business broking, childcare facility kind of owner and founder, and then obviously into design and some prior stuff before then. Like, have you always been it? Like, where did that whole business ownership piece come?
Well, I was working out the other day that I've had businesses for something like 55 years.
55 years, yeah.
So there is quite a lot of span to that. But as children, I was one of five. I was thinking about this before I came to speak with you, and we had a very interesting time because my mother believed if anybody can, girls can. So the girls did as much as the boys, relatively speaking, on the farm.
Right.
And so, on a farm, there's always things that happen. The weather changes, animals don't do what they're supposed to do.
Yep.
Crops don't grow in the way they're supposed to. And so you're always building or constructing or redesigning or making things better. So I think that's where the concept of, everything can be improved, there's opportunity on every corner came from.
Right.
And we've always, it was partly a sustaining farm. Like we had we sold vegetables at the gate, we sold eggs at the gate, we sold ham at the gate. You know, we had kind of like a real shop going, and us children could do all of the services for that from quite a young age, like the packaging, the selling, the marketing,
Yeah.
and you know. So I think I've never not been a seller of some kind or a maker of some kind, and I think actually everybody, no matter what role you have, is actually selling. You know, they're selling.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and I really believe in that. And so I think you've got to have a passion for what the product is, and you've got to have a desire to assist the customer to understand, you know. So I was very, very lucky, I think, in my upbringing, how many different opportunities we had. Like down in Southland, I remember when a new headmaster came to our school once, he was surprised that no children were there. Well, very few children were there, because, you know, it was either haymaking season or lambing season, or, you know, it was a time when you just didn't go to school. You know, it was sharing, and everybody helped the farm beside them. So you had one combine harvester or something, and you'd use it on their farm, and then you did it. And it was a very big kind of community effort where we lived, and that was great fun.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
in
a
an
really-
interesting way. And I think one of the aspects of that is you learn to interact with people of all ages. And I think if you have that capacity, that's very helpful in business.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and so I think the other thing I think I learned was when I was in my third year of physio school, they paid us, you know, a minimum wage, because we actually did do some work in the hospitals.
Yeah.
And I was startled to find that actually I was earning more than my father was at the time, even though we had the farm. He also worked in the freezing works and things. And I thought, how could a person on this wage, which I'm kind of having my flat and my food and things, you know, what we were doing, having fun,
Yeah.
how could he, you know, bring up 5 children and have them
Right.
all go to university? And, you know, it just seems they were more capable, I think, than some of us are these days. So I think I was very, very lucky with having loving parents and parents that really believed in you and supported whatever you wanted to do. I think that's a really nice thing.
Yeah.
So then I went to physio school. I love sport,
Yeah.
but if you went to phys ed school, they didn't pay you. If you went to physio school, you got a bond, and they paid for your course. So I thought, well, maybe it's nicer to teach people to walk than to be sports people. But
Right.
fortunately, my clinics, as soon as I came out, well, when I qualified very well, and they sent me initially to a hospital that had everything. It was Danny Verk Hospital. It had an orthopaedic clinic, it had an outpatient clinic, it had a children's clinic, you had inpatients, and you also had a van to do domiciliary work. So right out of physio school, my first job was sort of managing a business, really. I had 2 staff, and I think one of the reasons they sent me there, because I expressed an interest in teaching physio, because I really found the theory and the subjects very interesting. So I applied for a teaching job as soon as I qualified, but they said that wasn't allowed, and I needed experience.
Right.
So that was quite interesting, but I met my husband in the last year of physio school, so my husband-to-be, so I paid out of the bond. And when I went to Wellington to try and get a job, of course I couldn't get a job of equivalent leadership or skill level
Right, yep.
that I'd had.
Yeah, sometimes that
and
happens.
I didn't understand that, which I do understand now, because obviously I was a novice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I set up my own clinic. And back then, it was in the day where you didn't have ACC, which I thought was excellent for honing your physio skills, because people actually had to pay full dollar for it.
Yeah, right.
And you had to have it. And so I created manuals and books, and I gave them to all the doctors, and they used us, and very quickly I liked sport, as I said before, so we set up a gym, which back in the 70s wasn't that common for physios to have gyms and gymnasium as well. And we have very close liaisons with the orthopaedic surgeons and various things like that. And so I built and designed and built the physio clinics and the programs for people. And one of the things I really love about design is making sure that the flows are right. It's always been about human interaction with what happens, because if you don't have the flows right, it's less friendly, but it also is dysfunctional really in a lot of ways. So each of my rooms always had the most modern equipment, like even then beds that went up and down, holes for people's faces to go in,
Right.
and all the same machinery that you might want for specific healing. And so the physio could stand there and grab most things and then put it back. And it was very functional, very ergonomic, both for the physio and for the patient,
yeah.
you know. And I did circuit work for the people. So our clinic's got known for being innovative and helping people get better faster than most. Like
Right.
if someone had a sore thing and they were a sports person, we didn't say lie down on your back for a week for back pain, you know, for example.
Yep.
We would give them things that they could do and work on to maintain their fitness of their body, but do no harm to the part that was troubled.
Yeah, right.
And so very quickly we got to be with sports teams, and I travelled with an Olympic team. And, you know, it's back then, like for women in sports team, the physio was everything. You were the phys ed person, you were the part manager, and you were the doctor basically, because
Yep.
you know
Yep.
you did everything. We were very lucky. One of the trips I went on, I was with the women's soccer team.
Yeah.
We were going to our World Cup way back then, which was in Taiwan, but it was the time of the Red Sox. Do you remember Ad said in Falloon with the Red Sox? No, see, I'm quite old. But anyway, they were lovely to us, so they took our luggage and things like that and put it on their pricing. So the girls' team got to go there, and you know it was really fun, and we got second in the world, and that was exciting. But whereas when I travelled with the women's hockey team, which was our Olympic team, they were second in the world, but they ended up 8th. And what it taught me was the coach has a huge impact on the players, and it surprised me how at that time the players didn't have as much confidence as I would have expected them to have. Because I always imagined if I was selected for the New Zealand team, I would think I was superb just because I'd been selected, you know. But I remember on the bench once, and there was a girl, she was called to go on, and she was a defender, and she said, "What am I supposed to do? She's putting me in the midfield." I said, "Well, I don't know, but it seems to me they know you've got defensive skills, and at the moment their left midfielder is making all the plays, and she's putting you on there, so you keep her out of the game. So just perhaps try that, you know." But I think what that taught me is often people with good skills and good talents, and I think it applies in business, they need to know that they can use the skills they've got, and they need to be encouraged to do that. Do you know what I mean? And they need to fully understand the scope of their roles and where they can go and where they can expand or where they need to pull back in because of the team. And a lot of the people that I've employed have gone on to do things quite different from what they were originally employed for, especially when I had the childcare clinics.
Right.
Because the childcare is, I just love that business because I really love the brain. I think the person's brain is the most precious thing. And one of the worst things to happen is to not allow a child to fully explore and be creative. And in childcare, you have the opportunity. It tries to do music, you know, science, reading, writing, maths, you know, social studies. It tries to cover the whole gambit of what a lifestyle would be like to assist the children to understand living in the world. And so you've got great scope there with the teachers. Like if a teacher came and they loved photography, well, they could do all your pictures for you. If a teacher came and they loved gardening, like for example, in New Zealand, we're very lucky because Valentine's Day is when strawberry plants are available. Right. So instead of giving cakes or things, because we believed in healthy bodies, educated minds, successful futures, then we could give them a strawberry plant.
Right.
You know, and things like that. And we did a whole recycling thing where they grew plants, compost them, you know, and ate the food that they got from the childcare. And again, though, I was quite different in that I had centres. I thought, well, if schools have that many age group and the childcare's from 0 to 6, why aren't we as big as schools? So instead of having like the picket fence one, we had a different classroom for each age group. Right. And I thought that was particularly important if you really care about a child's developmental sequence and what they're capable of. Initially, I called my clinics Kiwi Sports, Kiwi Sport. I can't remember. Kiwi Sport, Kiwi Care Sports, or something like that.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to have the children skillful enough to be good athletes, and there's certain movement patterns that matter for that.
Right. Oh, okay.
But the government wasn't particularly keen on that because they felt we were there for education
Right.
and care. But so I changed the name to Kiwi Care Preschool to stop having problems with Aero.
Right. Yeah.
So sometimes you have to be quite adaptive. But,
Yeah, for sure.
We grew to have 21 licenses with centres that had between 150 and 250 license. But the other thing about that is that I think in any industry you've got to understand the public you're serving. And what a lot of childcare at the time that I had them, they kind of imagined themselves as kindergartens, which of course they weren't, because, well, they were from the educational perspective, but they weren't in that people were using them because they were working. And because I was used to a situation of shift work and things like that, we made our centres open longer and in different ranges. So you could be a nurse and come from 7 to 3 or 3 to 11. We even had for a short period one of them that could be open like 24/7 for respite care and things like that, because coming from physio, I know sometimes parents need time off, and they don't always have, they're sometimes a very nuclear family, so they don't always have people that can help them. But anyway, through this journey, I always built the buildings, planned the playgrounds, resourced them, with what I thought were really educational and fun toys and equipment. And one of our ones in Mangere, when we built it, I knew the centre down the road was often getting things stolen from it. So I actually put wire around the top and electrified it so nobody could break in. And Aero thought that was terrible. But actually the public didn't mind. They said, no, we're paying, they only had to pay $5 a week, but they were paying something to come, and they didn't want the toys taken, they liked them. And they actually supported that, which I found kind of interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
But anyway, I've always done things that perhaps authorities haven't seen the same way.
That's super interesting. And you built those, because often taking on an endeavour like that's quite expensive, quite capital intensive, to begin with. I noticed that you did some business broking prior to that. Was it that business broking that got you into
early child? Well, what had happened was my son got into the New Zealand squad, and they did quite well in tennis.
Right.
And then so we moved to Auckland, so I had to find a new thing to do. So while I was between businesses, I thought if I do my real estate degree, I could, it's not a degree license.
Yeah.
Then I could find a business that might interest me.
Right.
And of course, childcare had the most similarities, perhaps because it has a lot to do with the brain and education and training. And also, when I had my clinic, I remembered my son having to go somewhere, and I thought I didn't particularly like what was being offered, and that I felt it was too constraining and too dictatorial.
Right.
And not enough allowing the child to grow and be.
Yeah.
So I thought I want clinics that do that. So I bought one that was, and also I seem to be lucky in that a lot of people were underutilising the space they had, because it's a license per square metre affair.
Oh.
So if they have a property that could take, say, 50 children, if you worked out the maths of it, because it's $5 metres internal space and 10 metre external space plus parking. Well, it was in those days. If you know the maths of how big the site is, then you can change your licence, and that can significantly improve your business value and worth. Because unfortunately, the licence goes with the property, not with your skills. So you can't be in one site and suddenly say, oh, well, look, I'd like that site over there. Then you have to get that re-license, and that doesn't lose its license, so you could have a competitor immediately, Yeah. But what we did was buy one property, or we'd actually tend to buy 5, at once, and then we'd make one centre work and then build the next, so that it helped sustain itself financially.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And then once it had the 250 chilled license, we'd buy the property next to it just to run it and train the staff, and then once that was okay, then we'd move on and do the same, repeat the same procedure.
And you got to how many
We got 21.
in the end? Dang, that's quite hardcore.
Yeah.
It's a lot of kids.
It's a lot
to
of
deal
kids.
with.
Yes, that was in 2013 when I sold that. I was hoping my son might come back and live in New Zealand and run it, but he's an investment banker for Piper Sandler.
Okay.
And then, so that's a very big company and he's very good at that. So he's got a very American lifestyle.
Yeah. No,
And so do we too now, because we go over and see the
oh,
children.
you go? Yeah. And so where is that based in New York?
In New York, in Garden City, which is a nice suburb in New York.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yes, that's nice. So interesting. So
why the golf bag?
Yeah, why?
Do that? Well, I was retired and very happily retired because, I've got a lot of interests. Like I played tennis and we like going to the theatre and I like playing bridge and, there's always things to do, your friends and things. But I was playing bridge with a friend and she was 65 at the time. And she said, "Oh, you should play golf because I've just started playing golf." And I thought, well, it's getting slightly harder to play tennis. Maybe I should take up golf.
Yeah, because golf is definitely not as hard as tennis.
That's right.
On the body.
So I was at a country club in America, and I thought, well, if I can join the club, I will start playing golf because it had golf and tennis and had bridge. And it had all the things, and it had things as they do there. When you with grandchildren, they have these days for July the 4th or all these special days, and so it's easy to take your grandchildren to fun things.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So they let me join the club, and so when I got back, I phoned James Cooper, who's a very good golf coach here.
Okay.
James is lovely. And I said to him, I belong to a golf club, but I don't have golf clubs. Will you teach me? And so a relationship grew, and he taught me how to play. And I'm lucky in that I'm a little bit coordinated, and then with perfect teaching, because he had such great process and, everything, and routines, that I'm kind of so patterned when I play, it just helps,
Yeah.
So I was lucky to be learning through him. But then I thought to myself, when I was going out playing, that I just thought, the golf bag doesn't assist me. And I don't think it's a very beautiful thing.
Okay.
And I personally don't like zips because I think they jam and lock and are a problem.
Okay.
And so the golf bag had many unappealing things to me. And because I like nature and I like design, I think I would like a different bag for me personally.
Okay.
And then it just grew from there, because I found, and I find it's true when speaking to others, there's about 8 things our bag solves. It doesn't solve a couple of things, but and people that recognise that like it. So it's good.
And do you find it is people that play quite a lot of golf that resonate with the bag, or?
It's a whole variety of people. You have to. It's not the cheapest bag on the market because the design principles are so strong, and to have something like that costs differently.
Costs money to manufacture.
Yes.
Sure.
I'd say it's not really for the professional golfer because they need a particular type of bag. Although we are making another one that I think will suit them, but it's really for the social golfer. I mean, I'm a social. There's far more, and I think that's the thing I've noticed about golf. A lot of the products are made for the professional, and yet I'd say 85% of the people who play are social. There's millions and millions and millions of players. So, our bag is in the Euphoria is in the market where people either absolutely love it, or they love it but they couldn't have it because it is so distinctly different. Like many people, like on one of the emails I got this morning, they said, if people would pay me $1 for every time someone stops me and wants a photo of my bag, then I would have paid for the bag. I just so love it. So it's everybody knows that it's different. Do you
Yeah.
know? It's like when
Yeah.
Teslas first came out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
In fact, our Greenmate has the same kind of handle as the latest model Tesla, which I was reading recently about, and a lot of people just don't know how to open the door, and yet, because some design is so perfectly attuned to the product, you don't know where function and design stops. You know, but if you touch it, it will work. So
Right.
if people would just touch it, you know, the
It's
handle,
intuitive.
it bump, you know, the lever comes out and everything's beautiful. But I just found that rather interesting. That when I read about the door handle on the Tesla, and I knew it was the same as, I didn't know at the time when we were
Yeah.
designing the bag, that it's the same as our Greenmate. We've got a little part that comes off. So when you go to the green,
Yep.
you don't get wet handles and you don't leave a club behind.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
nice. Hey, so like, how long did you spend designing and iterating? Like, how many versions did you end up with? You said that you kind of built it, designed it for yourself originally.
Yes.
And often, you know, design is an iterative process.
Yes.
So, like, I guess from making something for yourself to this is something that, you know, you're kind of now
Commercialised.
actually commercializing and building subsequent products for. When did you know it was really something that you really wanted to, I guess, go down that path? Was it immediate as you were building it for yourself, or was there a moment?
Well, I think this project was, all my other projects were very planning, you know, that it was kind of repeating a pattern that was successful and then making sure the next pattern would be, you know, equal or better to the prior one, so you could reproduce the model. This one, I think, was quite different, and I don't know if that's the right spot to be in as an entrepreneur, in that
Right.
if you're too well heeled, you perhaps don't pay as much attention to where it's going and what it's doing. You know, I think I probably, and then COVID came, but I think the journey of this from thought to being in the market was really rather too long and too expensive, to be totally honest.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's great.
You know,
Yeah.
but I think once I realised that, when I knew we could make it, but then I realised how much we'd need to
Invest
change
or-
it to and adapt to make it what really happened actually was, when we put it on the market at the beginning of the year, we got 8.4 million hits on the internet. Like, it just was like amazing, and everybody wanted it, and we couldn't produce because we weren't capable of doing that. We were making like 20 a month, you know. Well, you know, so we've now changed it. We can make 500 a month now. And so during this year, I came back in. Well, I actually came back in last year, but and now I'm running it differently, so that we've got a proper assembly line, we've got proper processes, we've got proper timing of things coming in, we've got MOQs, which is minimum order quantities. We've done a whole lot of more things that sensible manufacturing would do.
Yeah, makes
And
sense.
I don't think it was sensible manufacturing, particularly
Originally.
before then.
And is it all manufactured here?
Yes.
And do you sell through golf shops, or do you sell mainly direct? Like, how?
How do we? Well, we've only had online sales. We've got our webpage. We've sold to 34 countries, but America and Canada and Great Britain, then India, and then Europe are our biggest markets. So what I've been doing, like last month, I started bringing on ambassadors. You know, so they get a sort of a small commission if they succeed in using the web page with a particular code that we know it's them, and then we can commission them. Today I was speaking to an influencer who's going to help us, who's just got the product, and he was talking to us about, you know, there's lots of things to do when you have a company that's online and is selling and, you know, putting products all over the world. Mm-hmm. And how your web page can be. Like, it's changed so much since when we first put it up, and these people were saying that we needed better blogs, we needed more community, you know, people seeing people using it, because one at the moment is all
content.
from the rendering and us doing the marketing.
Yeah.
Even although people tell me people are taking all these photos, we haven't really collected any back
Right,
in.
yep.
And these people are going to help us with that, which is really cool.
Right.
And so I've learned a whole new area about, if you put it, they can use some kind of iCloud method where it goes across all your social media pages when they do it, and they've got a plan of rollout of our new products. So there's lots of companies that help you, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not so used to that, you know,
Okay.
but it's really cool. Like we've now got a guy that's also he's going to do write our newsletters and do the whole program for that. You know, he says that it should be more storytelling on it, and I know I've read
sure.
about that, you know, but we haven't really done it to this point. So we've got a lot. We're capable now of selecting people that will really support what we can do beautifully, which is, you know, manufacture the bag, quality assure the bag, make sure it's assembled properly, make sure the customers receive it in a good state, make sure that they understand how to use it, and then have great customer service around that, you know. So, and so it's kind of interesting, and it's just really cool. But now we're bringing in other people. So I've learned that you can have things like, a lot of people have asked us if they could resell on their websites. So we check out the quality of their site and the quality of the product they're selling and how they deal. And so we're starting to do some reseller agreements.
Right, yep.
And then we've got retailers. What I found, which did surprise me, because you would think that the thing would be to sell it to golf shops.
Maybe, yeah.
But it
isn't.
it hasn't really worked out that way. Like people that approach me are people like duty-free shops that think that, you know, that have high-end handbags and things. They see our bag as being able to be capable of sitting in that mix when people have got time at airports and things like that. And they invite us into that space. Or they're fitters, you know, they're club fitters for golf, you know, so they're specialised people that want to offer something special with what they do, you know. So we're looking now at some retailer and country distributors. I've just signed my first distribution contract and so that was quite a big learning curve about how the percentages work here, and you know whether it's ex-factory door or it's DDP or you know, I've learned a whole lot of interesting stuff. I love learning though, so that's really cool. So Japan is going to be our first distributor, and it's likely that Great Britain will be our next. I haven't done. I could do US, but because we've got a home there as well, I've got a small agent, which is part of our own.
You can do it.
Yeah, because I've got an ability, like I've got a FIN number, so I can trade in the States, and I can go whenever I like, which is quite nice.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so you'll basically run here in the US, and then you'll work with some strategic distributors, and now you're getting into the world of influencer kind of and ambassadorship kind of marketing, which is very close to grassroots marketing and community growth.
Yes.
Which my first business that we sold was very heavy into influencer marketing before it was a thing.
Oh, really? So you'd know all that? I should have come to you.
So yeah, I mean, I learned a lot about influencer marketing before it was a thing in 2016, 2017.
Right.
And we would be paying influencers to basically make videos for us that would intertwine our product into the video, but it was a video that was organic in nature and would get views irrespective of the advertising inside it. And yeah, it was we would pay per video that would be released, but we would get non-linear outcomes for the video. So we might pay $40 for a video, for example, but we might get 5,000 registrations.
Right.
So it was a really interesting game of basically working with with content creators to create these videos.
Yes.
And it was an awesome experience. And now this landscape around it, influencer marketing and advertising, etc., has all kind of become more institutionalized.
Right.
So it's much more it's actually much easier to work with influencers because there is more of a regime around doing it. But of course it's driven the price up.
Yes.
So there was obviously this great arbitrage prior where you had this great opportunity because it was under basically utilised.
Yes.
Now it's a bit of a more competitive environment. So yeah, I learned a lot about that sort of stuff.
Well, I do think these reseller people are very smart because they don't really do anything except have a beautiful web page.
Right, and a web page that converts.
Yes, a page that converts, which is very important for us as well, of course.
Yes.
But I just think it's interesting to see how people, because I'm a doer, I prefer to have something I can touch and do,
Yeah.
But I can see that there are smarter ways of running and having a business, But I'm very spoiled in that the people that work with me, they're happy to introduce ideas and grow those things and be very good at what they do. So they expand and we expand, it's a delightful thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And, so that's why I know now a lot more about ordering, the elements that go into it at sensible prices and sensible quantities, sensible time frames and, sensible contracts and, things like that.
So you mentioned that you got all these web page visits and you got all this traction initially. What drove that?
I think that it was just so different. No one expected it. Like we had
actually
put it on the
October
in October the year before.
Yeah.
What are we? 25,
Yeah,
24. We actually launched the web page, and I think we got 2 sales or something, not very many. So we weren't expecting necessarily to be overwhelmed. But and people had approached us because if you go to the PGA show, people say, "Look, we'll do this for you. We'll market you this way," and we didn't have any idea. So we just said, "Oh, well, we'll just see what happens when we get there." But because we were an innovative product, they allowed us to go on a couple of sessions they have there for people that are new for the industry.
Ah, cool.
So and then on the field day, which is the day before. Well, everybody just came to us because all the others were more or less the same. Like, I'm not saying they're exactly the same. They might be more integrated or whatever, but there was nothing like our product. So everybody wanted to touch, feel, and use it. Yes.
So it was like
and so there was a Japanese influencer that was there. So some of the influencer people took pictures.
And that's how you got the traffic, is because
Yes,
they were like, "Oh, this cool new thing."
My staff will know which one it was that went to over the 8 million, but several others got like 3 to 5 million hits because golf's a very big. I mean, if you take the whole of golf, which I think is at 140 million, I don't know. People will know the numbers. So that isn't a lot against the whole amount, but it was still huge for us.
Yeah, for sure.
And we just got
so exciting.
Shopify. In fact, closed down. They thought we must be fraudulent or something because suddenly we had all these orders and they wouldn't pay out, which was really annoying. Like this weekend, with everybody having Black Friday sales, the Shopify shut down our site again. But I read a lot of other people didn't get paid because normally you get paid, within
a couple
2
of days. Yeah.
Well, they haven't. Well, actually, I noticed it did come in just before I came to now, so they have started paying. But I think that must be a great business because if they hold that amount of money all over the world,
and they don't pay interest on it.
Don't pay people. That's not good, is it? I mean, well, it's not good for us, but it's very good use of money for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole thing.
Yes.
I mean, even Wise, for example, TransferWise, a really great product.
Yes, it is.
But obviously, they're not paying interest on cash.
Yes.
So it's very interesting. US dollars actually is one of our US dollar products, probably our most popular product at the moment, because we pay 3.4% on US dollars that's on call.
Really?
Which is awesome because we've also got the FDIC and the SIPC insurance. But it's quite interesting that, there are these great products like Wise out there that do offer you the ability to just hold US dollars if you want to.
Yes.
But of course, they're not paying you the interest. Same with a lot of those brokers, a lot of brokers out there, or even banks, they won't pay you the interest unless you request it.
Right.
So there's all these things in the fintech space, which is kind of really where Shopify sits as well, because they've got this float of capital that they get through the credit card exchange, and then they get to, they might be holding a float that they can get interest on that they're not passing through to clients, which is a bit of a shame for the clients, but great for them.
Yes. No, I've learned, probably the other really good business to go into would be lending money at the moment. Because, New Zealand, unfortunately, as you probably know, changed the rules November, I think, was it 22 or something, and made it all that, laundering money.
Yes,
worry.
the AML regime is very strict. Not as strict as like Australia, perhaps, but yeah.
Well, Australia's loosened their agreements a little bit. So I have learned that there are some things that New Zealand, I think, could be much better with in a financial way to assist manufacturers. But you see, I don't believe in
right.
help. I believe in supporting myself. But I do notice, for example, if I shifted my factory to Australia, then the Australian government will pay half-price shipping everywhere. Now, the shipping costs of our product, because it's not, it's big.
It's not small, yeah.
Not small. That's significant in the end. But, if we freight crate lots, like container lots, that's fine. But so, it'd be quite nice if our government thought about that, maybe.
Incentives to actually get to have some manufacturing to be here in a sustainable way.
Yes. And I thought foolishly that the trade agreements I'd read about would include everything that was being sold from New Zealand.
Right.
But that's not true either.
Right.
That it's mainly agricultural or medical items or IT items now, like apps and that they support. But a pure manufactured item or sports goods, that's not in the radar. So you pay the normal, what they call HS codes. You get a code depending on what your product's made of, and different countries apply those rules in different ways. But we discovered that. So I thought that New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, for example, would help me understand what my best HS code was, because that was a whole new experience to us. But they don't do that. They do other things, but they don't do that. And so, I thought in some ways everybody says, oh, no, they're set up to help you. And I thought, well, if they're set up to help you, why don't they answer some basic, what I would consider 101 manufacturing requirements?
Interesting.
What they are very good at, I will say we've been using them lately because now we're a little more known. We get these scam people that say, look, we want to buy 30 e-drives or something, and, the Qatar government might want such and such, or they make these orders. And before I used to diligently make up a pro forma and do all the stuff. But now I just send it straight off to New Zealand Trade and Enterprise and ask, is this person bona fide? And they say, and they do get back to, so that has saved a lot of time and nuisance. I see you do crypto a little bit, I think.
Yeah, we do.
So one of my first companies, they wanted to pay in crypto. So I got myself a wallet and all those things. And then we were talking to him, but then I found it a bit strange how he wanted to go about that. But, I'm willingly going forward. But then I forget what happened exactly, but then we didn't actually do that. But, that was going to be a significant order for, over $400,000.
Yeah, it's worth exploring when it's that much. And actually, in certain regions it makes sense. Like we do have the crypto funding wallets, which allows you to take receive Bitcoin, Ethereum, or stable coins. And a stable coin is a digital dollar. And in certain countries, like we're working on an Active Investor Plus program at the moment where people that are looking for a residential hedge, who might be in the US or the UK, they want to come here, they want to invest here and earn residency. Now, not so much in the US, but it's still expensive. But, the average cost to make the investment and get the capital here is between 6 and 10%. And a lot of that cost is through how you have to bring the money in. Whereas stable coins, it's there immediately and you're paying 0.6% in our case, right? So there's a real application for why you would use stable coins in certain areas. Another funny example was that my dad had an issue where he was trying to buy a car part online and he ultimately got scammed.
Right.
And awesome, though, is that the fintech company that was being used as a part of the scam flow caught the transaction and intercepted it and stopped it. But they were a Ugandan fintech company, bona fide, legit.
Really, that's unusual because people think Uganda will have the opposite.
And they intercept this thing, and they're like, "Oh, well, we can't probably because of some sort of sanction type things. They couldn't send the money."
Right.
The only way that he could get the money was through stablecoin, which is quite funny, right? When you get these situations, because ironically, you'd have thought that it would have been crypto that would have been the thing that got him scammed, but in that example, it was actually the only way that capital could efficiently find its way back, which I just thought was quite funny.
I did find an interesting experience. Like most people said, some people, because they know how adventuresome I am, said, "Oh, don't even go there." They were so panicked about crypto and all
trying
of that.
to do the transaction
And I said, "But
through it."
look, I've looked it up, and these people have done it, and." The people were very helpful to actually put your money in and then move it into the various little wallets and the things that you had to do. But one of the disappointing things was at the time I did it, the rate changed significantly. So, 450,000 is a significant thing to have rate changing down.
Was that on because you were you weren't receiving it in a stable coin, you were receiving it in a Bitcoin?
I perhaps didn't know enough. I just put my money in there as US dollars initially, and then I had to change it to...
Probably Ethereum or Bitcoin.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Ethereum, I think.
Ethereum, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that is a commodity, so that's like... Well, it's not a commodity, it's for all intents and purposes, a very speculative asset.
Oh, okay. So probably I should have come and seen you, Charlie.
But, well, I mean, it's interesting, right, because Bitcoin as well would be considered a speculative asset. However, obviously, it's had this appreciation.
Yes.
And the appreciation is that people don't trust fiat money as much anymore. And
Yes.
that's kind of an explanation of why you're seeing this uptick in this alternative. Mm-hmm. And traditionally, and like we had a couple of years ago, when these things prop up, then central government, central states of power obviously don't like alternate currencies coming and disrupting the status quo. Mm-hmm. But yeah, obviously for transacting, you don't want an asset that could move 10% in a day.
No.
You might want to hold that in a treasury that you can hold for 20 years, knowing that, may think that there's going to be...
Well, you've got time for it to just move back again.
Exactly. Volatility is okay.
Yes.
Like it's like Buffett says that stocks are extremely dangerous over the short term, but extremely safe over the long term.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So now, since you've actually been in the game a little bit longer, and Shopify and Stripe also now are supporting stablecoins, which is also getting rid of the surcharges on the credit card. So it's a very interesting space, actually, payments right now.
Right.
Because the velocity of money is increasing, and your son will know that very acutely, obviously, in the investment banking space.
Yes.
Is that the velocity of money is increasing because essentially settlement times are becoming faster because of technology like stablecoins. And now with stablecoins, in theory, you can take payment without having to worry about a fluctuation. But yeah, it's an interesting space. I think it's a very unique time in history where you're having a very clear conflict between incentives of central government and banks. Because at the moment, banks create most of the money in the system, whereas the underlying, I guess, concern for your JP Morgans of the world is that with stablecoins, the actual central bank, the Fed itself, could actually essentially issue the digital dollars, taking away a lot of the leverage and essentially revenues and profits from banks in the US.
It's scaring the World Bank too, I think.
Yeah, well, totally, right? So it's a very cool time. When populations become wealthy, they have less kids, and that is obviously meaning then that trend will unlikely reverse unless people for some reason started having kids more, which is probably not going to happen.
Do you have children?
I have 3.
Oh, good man.
Yes.
You've more than produced yourself.
Yes, we did. 10, 9 and 7. So we went and got it done.
Yes.
And very happy about that. But I'm a part of a generation of people that think that they shouldn't have kids often.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Millennials don't feel like they should have kids. I have lots of friends and people in my friendship group, Perkins, whatever,
Yeah.
that are 30s and they don't have kids and they don't want to bring kids into this world and all these things.
That's so sad, isn't it?
Because they've been told lies,
Yes.
basically. But they, they'll go and they'll have dogs.
I think it would be very nice if I believe the globalist institutions that we thought would help everybody sort of losing their influence. Like a lot of people are pulling out of the World Health Organization, the Paris Agreement and things like that. More people are pulling out of it than are staying in it now. And so I think that might help countries bring back their identity a little bit.
For sure, it will it'll encourage that to come back, right?
I think it's a shame that they abuse their power.
Well, that's what, yeah. So that is, and that's why cryptocurrency has taken off. That's why gold has had a very strong run.
Yes.
Because outside of debasement of currency, which we're seeing, which is actually, that means that gold is not getting more expensive, Bitcoin is not becoming more expensive, companies not becoming more expensive. It's just the money that you use to buy them is, in theory, becoming worth less.
Right.
More so than this being this gain. Because if true inflation is 7% a year, then, and the S&P's done let's say 9% over the long term, you're only getting 2% of real return in that example. True inflation is understated by all measures. And obviously we double pay in New Zealand because we are a subservient currency to the US. But yeah, what we've seen is centralized organizations have lost trust because perhaps there's been an abuse of power, or transparency of information has not been clear, and then we have found out in hindsight that we were kind of duped. And then that creates these mimetic shifts where people go, well, I'm not going to play that game, I'm going to vote some other way, and then you see Bitcoin go up, or start getting adoption, or people hoarding gold, and then that's kind of what you get is these mimetic behaviours.
One of the other influences of the accumulation of shares into one sort of package, like the S&P 500 and the New Zealand 50, that didn't exist a few years ago.
Yeah.
But it probably has all of your lifetime, but it didn't used to. You had to choose your own ones,
Yes.
And that's a different thing, whereas it's, because of how that operates, it's only got the best there all the time and the others are dropping away. So it's kind of a falsity in a way, but it's a reality too. But in itself, that means an investor doesn't have to do anything, in my opinion. The smartest thing to do is just
use low-cost indexes.
Yeah, just go in those and leave your money there, and it'll give you income in return because it always grows. It can't not because of the way it's set up. It's probably a heck of a lot easier than some of the things I've done, but I don't think it's anything like as much fun.
Well, it's different. It's knowing the race that you're running.
Yes.
That's what I talk to my kids about. That all the time. I talk about knowing the race you're running, and you're running a different race to your sister or your brother, so you don't need to worry about if they're seemingly getting something that you're not.
Yes.
Because we're running our own races.
Yes.
And, a lot of investors, it's like, let's talk about what race you're running. I speak to a lot of people that are interested in investing, of course, and technology and building businesses. And I've done this podcast for a while now, so I've spoken to a lot of people, and it's quite fun. But if I'm investing in an index, all I'm doing is I'm trying to outrun inflation. That's all I'm doing. I'm not trying to be special. I'm not trying to win.
No,
I'm just outrunning debasement of currency. Whereas if obviously you hold 10 individual equities, the race you're running is you're taking a view on those companies. What has more, I think risk is also misunderstood in many ways. Like you said, indexes have this kind of, there isn't the same price making and price taking. It's basically, I'm a passive fund, I'm going to buy these, I'm going to follow this index. So for example, a great example would be all the funds that are very, very, very expensive in New Zealand, but they're passive products, but they've got active fees. Whereas I don't know if you guys have actually started to move any of your wealth to the US yet, but obviously the regime and the competitiveness in America is that, passive products, money market funds, all these things are very cost effective. Whereas here you've got passive products that are charged like they're active. And then what you've seen is a lot of debasement of other currencies. New Zealand dollar a prime example, but not as bad as let's say the lira in Turkey. But that has also meant that more people invest passively in the S&P 500 again. So you've created this top-heavy, systemically important index that has less price discovery. But at the same time more, because there's just a sheer flow of inward capital. I get dubious of indexes, but they have such a strong mimetic and reflexive cycle associated with it that, like you say, it's kind of it's just this pile of.
I think if you want to be just purely safe and not think about it, it's not going to do you any harm, you know.
No, because
it can't really.
Yeah, because as long as the 500 companies in there, and that's the great thing about indexing, is that.
Yeah.
But you just have to accept that sometimes that index will be 30 times revenue or 30 times earnings, and sometimes it will be 10.
But I just, I find my son interesting because, my husband's very conservative. He's very much like my husband, really. Whereas I like to do things with money, to create things, hopefully make the world a better place, or offer a better service, or create a better product. So I'm driven in a totally different way, and I tried with my childcare to create people that would also want to do that. So I think it's very nice to still have people that really like that. Like my designers very like that, and my business development manager, she's just great, because she used to have a business of her own, and for various reasons she's working for me now, but she just can do anything. She can do the logistics, she can prepare the product to go, she can do the web page. She's now making a new Shopify retail. Some people just like a whole variety of things, don't they?
Yeah, I mean,
and they're the people I find special, but it's kind of.
Totally agree. I mean, I totally agree with that. So we're a big believer at our organisation. So we call them. So we say that we are a modern day guild for business owners, founders, and what we call high agency individuals. And a high agency individual is someone that's going to go and basically pick up something and get it done, right? Like, so high agency means that you have agency.
Yes.
Right. So the reason we target those three people is because they understand that, if you don't pay directly for something, you're probably paying for it. You just don't know how. So that's why we're going after those people. And I think that you're always going to make more by taking something from 0 to 1. You're always going to get a better return if you have something that doesn't exist and then you create something. It's like, and we encourage all of our team to build equity. So that's why the company's called eccuity. It's a mix on words between acuity and equity.
Yes.
And we just believe that in this modern day, you need to focus on building equity for yourself in whatever shape or form that looks like. And that's something. Yeah.
Well, certainly my discovery from all this time is my husband's always invested in shares and things, so much more tradable than even property. Like, property is very slow at the moment. Like, property used to be fine here.
Yeah.
It didn't, you could
60 to
you
90
could make
days
a
should be
choice that
sweet.
if it was roaring, you'd sell your worst property, and if it was dull, you might have to sell your best property or something, but property's very hard to move on at the moment. It's like it's a different cycle. I think it's probably turning a little bit, but I think it's, but the share market, you can always sell. I realise that there's differences in price, but it always sells.
Yeah, you can always, you can. That's technically not true.
Oh, is it? Well, all I can say is my husband's money seems much more flexible than mine, which tends to be assets or in companies or things like that. That's you can't just suddenly say, I want to sell my company tomorrow.
So there's no...
you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. No, so technically it's not true, because technically in an auction-based system, you don't always have a buyer on the other side.
No, you don't. That's true.
Technically. But in the case of America and well-established markets, is you have these organizations that participate in the market that are called market makers, and they provide liquidity to the market, and they are legally bound to provide a level of liquidity to the market.
Because I know sometimes if my husband was doing some trading, sometimes he would say he was sort of the whole price of our little stock market, you know, because it's not a big volume. And
Yeah, yes. So there is no market maker for property. That doesn't exist. So yeah, a lot of people are finding that, of course, in a bad market, then they're like, oh, well, Bitcoin doesn't have any requirement for
yes,
repairs.
that's right. That's right.
But, you know, if I own treasuries, I can get a buyer on instantly. If I
That's
own
right.
equities, I can get a buyer instantly. It's one of those things. And it's a little bit like private equity as well. Like private equity has got a lot of mispricing venture capital the same because it's illiquid. So yeah, like illiquid assets inherently have less volatility in price because they're not as regularly traded. So price discovery is not as good. The amazing thing about publicly liquid equities and assets is, yeah, like you say, they are marked every day. You don't get to go and say, oh well, I'm not going to look at it for 3 years, and you know, as long as I don't sell it, it's still what it was worth when I paid for it. Whereas with the public market, you don't get that because other people are trading it and it takes the price up and down. But yeah. Anyway, we've been talking for a while. It's been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the pod. I appreciate it. Is there anything you want to tell us about the new products you're releasing before we go?
Well, they're more for sort of gifts, probably. You know,
Okay.
and that they're golf products that in many cases have been around a long time, just like the bag, but we've done special quirks and tricks with them to make them more interesting, and more usable and much nicer to hold and use, you know. So yeah, we think they're lovely. My designer, it's a big project doing something as complicated as our golf bag, and I know already someone's taken it to China and asked them if they can make it, and they say it's too complicated, but we've also got patterns and things, and they can't do that. But whereas these new ones, it's easier for him to make and do in a shorter period of time, and he needed some relief, I think, and something of his own. We're going to soon have bags where each of our staff, because they all like quality things, my staff, I'm very spoiled, and they can design a quirky one themselves now that we've gone into this other line, and they'll have around the bottom of them designed by their name, you know, so that they... So that's kind of cool for us, but for the customer, it's going to be a lovely touch and feel thing, and much easier to use, and always wonderful to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and sharing your story. I thoroughly enjoyed it.